Chapter 2 of The Fall of Fergal. When Malcolm Kent had first laid his eyes on McNally, which was at the railroad train station because he hadn't been at her local or regional heat of the competition, he'd been rather surprised by her appearance. With the exception of mentioning Fergal's sticky-out ears, I haven't really paid much attention to describing what everyone looked like. You'll see why in a moment. You already know that Dad McNally, Captain Rufus, had a wooden leg. And you already know that Albie and Joshua were almost identical, but what you probably didn't know until now is that they all had wiry, untamable, gingery red hair, and they all had freckles, hundreds of them in all. And all of them, the McNallys, not the Freckles, had two large front teeth with a gap between them, except for Jackie, the jackal. Hers looked more like George Washington's, which I believe were actually made of wood. In other words, once you've described one McNally, you've just about described them all, and none of them was about to win any beauty contest. But then again, if you've seen my author photograph, you'll be fully aware that neither am I. Their father looked most unlike the others because of his big red nose. He hadn't always had a big red nose, and it wasn't something that he could pass on to his children. In other words, it wasn't hereditary and had more to do with his trips to the bottle shop. But it wasn't LaFay's buck teeth, unmanageable hair, and multiple freckles that surprised Malcolm from Tap and Type. It was how shabby her clothes were and how unwashed she looked. Jackie did her best, but there was no running water in their apartment except for a drip from the ceiling from the apartment upstairs and the condensation on the windows in cold weather. What shocked Malcolm was how thin and hungry she looked. Now, Malcolm wasn't the most caring man in the world. He never gave money to charity, not even to those nice ones that look after unwanted donkeys or retired pit ponies that have been down the mines all their working lives. He didn't always hold doors open for senior citizens, and on more than one occasion, he had smoked in a non-smoking waiting room at a train station. Once, and I checked this with his parents, who swear that it is true, he didn't even bother to thank his gran for the socks and aftershave she gave him on Christmas. But when Malcolm first laid eyes on McNally, he hoped beyond hope that she would win the grand finals of the Tap and Type typing competition. He thought of the three other finalists, Graham Large, Peggy Snoot, and Anna Malting. Graham Large had arrived with 3 pieces of very expensive-looking matching luggage, and his parents had paid extra so that he could travel down first class and have a whole suite of rooms, separate bedroom, bathroom, and sitting room, in the Dell instead of a single room. He'd bossed Malcolm around as though he was a personal servant, not a representative of the sponsors. Peggy Snoot was nice enough, very polite in fact. She seemed a little nervous, but why not? The finals were important to all the contestants. Anna Malting was a different matter altogether. In the taxi from the station to the hotel, she'd gone on and on and on about how her local and regional heats in the competition had been so much harder than everyone else's and what she was going to do when she won the grand prize, not if. Large, Snoot, and Malting all looked well-dressed, well cared for, and well-fed. Not McNally. Malcolm crossed his fingers, and though he wasn't a religious man, muttered a little prayer to God just in case he, or of course she, existed. Once Malcolm had shown LaFay to her room, he showed her the itinerary. If you've no idea what an itinerary is, you might imagine that it was a wonderful machine made of gleaming chrome with horns to shout down and ear-pierces to listen to. If the truth be told, itinerary was a piece of paper with type printed on it, being the itinerary for the grand finals of the Young Typist of the Year, sponsored by Tap and Type, providers of keyboards to the crowned heads of Europe and beyond. It was beautifully typed. Her heart-thumping LaFay read it quickly to make sure that she'd be able to meet Jackie, Albie, Joshua, and Fergal outside the Dell at 3 o'clock as originally planned. She didn't have a watch. The McNallys couldn't afford one, and her arms were so thin one probably would have slipped right off of her hand anyway. There was to be a meet the other finalists at a finger buffet in the bellhop suite at 1 o'clock. LaFay knew what a buffet was. There had been a buffet car on the train. A buffet meant food, which suited her fine. If she was really smart, she might come up with a way of snaffling some of the buffet to give to the others when they arrived. It was the finger part that bothered her a bit. Would all the food be fingers? She could think of chicken fingers, and there was a plant called okra, which some people called ladies' fingers. but she couldn't think of any other kinds of fingers people might eat. Then she remembered Jackie telling her that there was a delicious pudding called trifle, which had sponge fingers in it. At least those kinds of fingers sounded okay. The next item on the itinerary was at 2 o'clock. Meet the press, described as being a photo call with some of the capital city's leading evening newspapers. LaFay hoped that this wouldn't take more than an hour, because after that it was a free afternoon for sightseeing, right up until dinner with our generous sponsors in the Sizzle Grill at 8 o'clock, which would leave her with plenty of time to spend with her family. You don't have to wait until lunch or supper to have some food, said Malcolm kindly. You can use room service anytime you want. What's that, please? LaFay asked politely. If you want, say, a chicken sandwich or a mug of hot chocolate, said Malcolm, you pick up that phone, dial one, and tell them what you want. They bring it to your room and you sign for it, but you don't have to pay. Tap and type pays, see? I see, said LaFay, wide-eyed in wonderment. She imagined people throughout the hotel picking up their phones and ordering chicken and hot chocolate. It was like living in a palace. This is another example of Malcolm Kent being a very nice man at heart. Room service was not something officially offered as part of the grand finalists' trip. Of course, Graham Large could dial up and order what he wanted, but Mommy and Daddy would be sent the bill at the end of his stay. Peggy Snoot was far too polite to even think of calling room service because Malcolm hadn't told her she could, and when Anna Malting had said, I can call down for anything I want, can't I? After all, I've earned it. Malcolm had replied, I'm afraid you will be charged for it, though phone calls home are free. You can call home too, of course, Malcolm now told LaFay. You dial 9 for an outside line and then your number. Thank you, said LaFay. She didn't want to disappoint the nice man from Tap and Type by telling him that they didn't have a phone at home. They used to have one, but the telephone company had gotten fed up with coming to repair the wiring every time her father tore the phone out of the wall and threw it across the back room, which was really to the side. Right, said Malcolm. So it's dial 1 for room service and 9 for an outside line, LaFay nodded. Both the Bellhop Suite and the Sizzle Grill are here in the Dell, said Malcolm. They're both on the first floor. Follow the signs. Thank you. I'll see you at the other finalists then, okay, said Malcolm. But feel free to call room service before then if you're hungry. Chicken sandwich and a mug of hot chocolate, LaFay nodded. Thanks. Malcolm went out through the open doorway and closed the door to LaFay's room behind him. She was alone at last. Now she would have to come up with a way of smuggling the rest of the McNallys inside. If she'd failed, of course, little Fergal might still be living a normal life today. Chapter 3. A little picture there at the beginning. The ambulance man took one look at what was left of Fergal and knew there would be no driving to the Sacred Heart Hospital at breakneck speed with lights flashing and sirens blaring. The neck breaking had already happened, and once the doctor had officially declared the poor boy dead, something that anyone with a pair of eyes in his or her head could have done at a glance, he'd simply wait for the police photographer to take a few photographs, then scoop the kid into a body bag and take a leisurely drive to the morgue. The morgue was another name for the mortuary. It was in the basement of the Sacred Heart Hospital where they put the bodies of those who died in the hospital or were brought in dead from outside, accident and murder victims. The ambulance man, whose name was Morris, idly wondered whether Fergal, though at that stage, of course, he didn't know that the victim's name was Fergal, was the victim of an accident or murder, or even suicide. Sometimes people deliberately jumped out of windows. Did this one fall? Was he pushed, or did he jump? The doctor, a roundish man who looked, walked, and spoke remarkably like a duck, arrived, waddled quacking through the small crowd that had gathered, nodded at one of the uniformed police officers keeping people at a respectful distance, and knelt down next to Fergal. He whistled through his teeth. Fell 12 floors, he guessed. 14, said the assistant manager of the Dell, a small man with greased-back black hair and a mustache so thin that it looked as if it had been drawn on with one of those extra fine-nibbed drawing pens. His name was Mr. Leslie, spelled the girl's way. The doctor cursed under his breath. I used to be accurate to within one story, he muttered, getting to his feet. He's dead, all right, he called out to Morris. Bag him and tag him. Mr. Leslie cleared his throat purposefully. It's amazing what message a purposeful clearing of the throat can convey. This one could be instantly translated into, show a bit more respect, Doc. The victim's grieving family are within earshot. And within earshot, they certainly were. The moment Fergal had toppled out of the window, Jackie had dashed across the room and leaned out, grabbing at thin air. She had let out a cry of "No!" stretching the last O to at least a good 15 seconds, but it's no good writing it down as "No!" because that looks as though it rhymes with moo, the noise cartoon cows make, and the noise Scottish folk make in very bad Hollywood movies. This was very definitely a no to rhyme with snow, with the OW long drawn out and distraught. It should also be added to the list of the last sounds Fergal probably heard on his way to his squishy death. I'm sorry, I should have thought of it earlier, and I hope you don't feel that I've betrayed you as a narrator. Well, at least I've apologized. Those smart Alecs amongst you who are wondering why I didn't mention Fergal's own screaming as he fell 14 stories, I simply tell you this. I made no mention of Fergal's scream because he didn't scream or cry as he fell. He fell as silently as a sack of rocks or potatoes or something equally silent. Perhaps it was the shock of it all. Perhaps he was about to scream when he came into contact with the solid ground, and all thought of screaming went out of his mind. There, now look what you've made me go and do. Get all involved in the unpleasant side of things again. Where was I? Yes, Jackie had dashed to the window and, seeing that it was too late to catch him, ran straight to the door and out into the corridor. LaFay, Albie, and Joshua dashed out of the hotel room after their big sister, who had already reached the elevator and was jumping up to press the down button. There were 2 elevators, and according to the arrow indicator above them, one was on the 93rd floor and the other on the 46th. Jackie headed for the main stairs and ran down them at an incredible speed, sobbing as she went, jumping 5 or 6 steps at a time. LaFay, Albie, and Joshua somehow managed to keep up, all sobbing their eyes out. Nothing funny happened at this stage, so if you're hoping for a laugh, we interrupt the story for a joke. Now, it's not original, it's not my joke, and I'm not claiming it as my own. It's simply the first joke that came into my head when I thought that a little levity might be in order. Oops. Two cannibals are eating a boiled clown. One cannibal turns to the other between mouthfuls and says, "Does this taste funny to you?" Oh. There, not a side splitter, but it certainly brought a twitch of a smile to the corners of my mouth and is a nice relief from all those sobbing relatives of Fergal McNally charging downstairs to what was a foregone conclusion, one splatted little brother. Anyway, I think I'm getting rather ahead of myself again. When we left LaFay at the end of chapter 2, she hadn't even smuggled her family into her room, so Fergal can't have had the opportunity to fall out of the window yet. Perhaps we should go back a bit. On the back of LaFay's door were 2 framed notices, both printed entirely in red ink. One was headed in the event of holes, and the other in the event of fire. The one headed in the event of holes was full of doom and gloom and basically said that if a huge hole opened up under the hotel, there wasn't a great deal you could do except hide under your bed and pray or stand in the doorway. Ideally both. Hide under your bed in the doorway and pray. LaFay was of the opinion that if a big hole opened up under the hotel, no matter what you did, you'd still end up in it. It was the second notice, in the event of fire, in equally red print, that caught her eye. It gave useful tips about not using the elevators and where the assembly point was so that management could do a roll call and try to work out who was still trapped in the building and needed rescuing. There was a drawing, too. It was a plan of the floor of the hotel her room was on, and as well as the main stairs, it showed some back stairs marked down to fire exit. If these stairs led down from her floor to the fire exit, LaFay reasoned, then they must also lead up from the fire exit to her floor. She would go and investigate. Slipping her room key with its long metal tag into the only pocket of her best, but still very drab, dress, she slipped out of her room along the corridor to the left and slipped through a door marked fire exit. Yep, there was suddenly a lot of slipping, but not of the oops banana skin variety. It opened onto a cold, dark staircase of uncarpeted concrete steps with a metal handrail set into the wall, a real contrast to the posh plushness of the rest of the dell. The stairs seemed to go back on themselves in a spiral square, if there is such a thing as a spiral square, forever and ever, with fire exit doors from each floor leading onto them. But finally, LaFay reached the bottom. There was a set of double doors with a metal bar running across them at average adult waist height. "Emergency exit only," said the sign. "Push bar." It was obvious to LaFay that there wouldn't be any handles on the outside of the door, which, from the smell of exhaust fumes and honking of car horns, she guessed opened out onto the street, probably at the side of the hotel. This was to stop people from doing exactly what LaFay's family planned to do, sneak in without paying. The only way to get Jackie, Fergal, Albie, and Joshua inside this way was to open the door, somehow keep it wedged open, then circle the hotel with them until they found it. But what if someone found the exit wedged open first? That's why LaFay decided she wouldn't open it then and there, but leave it until just before 3 o'clock, when she'd arranged to meet the others. LaFay went all the way back up the 14 stories via the back stairs. She could, of course, have slipped out through any of the fire doors and taken the elevator up the rest of the way, but she didn't want to arouse suspicion. For all she knew, big hotels such as the Dell hired detectives to be on the lookout for strange goings-on 24 hours a day, and LaFay was right about that, as you will discover. They're called house detectives, and the chief house detective at the Dell was a man named Charlie Tweedy. Charlie was to become interested in the McNally children, very interested indeed. But LaFay had no way of knowing that, not then. Charlie was an ex-naval man and an ex-policeman, and in all the time he'd been on the force, he'd never let an unsolved case remain unsolved. He was like a terrier, which is one of those dogs that once it's sunk its teeth into you, won't let go until it's well and truly satisfied it's won. If you don't believe me, you should see my brother's nose. He bent down to pat a terrier once and to say, "Nice doggy," or whatever it is that brothers say to terriers, but the dog took it to mean, "Let's fight." When my brother stood up, he had the dog attached to his nose. It would probably still be there today if the dog's owner hadn't shown it something more tasty to chew on. My brother does still have a faint scar to remember the occasion, though. If I told you Charlie had a nickname, you might therefore expect it to be along the lines of Terrier Tweedy. That's certainly the name I would have given him. But no, Charlie Tweedy was known in the trade as Twinkle-Toes Tweedy. Stick around long enough and you'll find out why. Back inside her room and a bit out of breath from running down the back stairs and up again, LaFay looked at the time on the radio alarm clock on the bedside table. 12:18. LaFay was feeling very hungry by now, which wasn't unusual because she was used to having only one, rather small, main meal a day back home, but she wondered whether she should call room service and ask for a chicken sandwich and a mug of hot chocolate. Sure, it was less than 3/4 of an hour until she was supposed to be eating fingers in the sizzle grill, or was it the bellhop suite? But the more she thought about plates filled high with fingers, the less appetizing the whole meet the other finalists seemed. What if they were monkey fingers? They'd almost look human, and would the nails have been taken off, or were you supposed to peel them off yourself? Or was it polite to eat them? They'd be very crunchy. LaFay McNally picked up the phone and dialed the number 1. "Room service," said a cheery voice. "I'd like a chicken sandwich and a mug of hot chocolate, please," said LaFay. "Certainly, madam," said the cheery voice. "White, brown, or rye?" "A chicken sandwich and a mug of hot chocolate, please," LaFay repeated, a little less sure of herself this time. "The bread, madam, for the sandwich. Would you like white bread, brown bread, or rye bread?" "Oh," said LaFay, relieved. "White, please." "Toasted?" Yes, please, and a mug of hot chocolate." "Certainly, madam. 1 chicken sandwich on toasted white and a mug of hot chocolate for room 1428. It'll be with you within 15 minutes, said the cheery voice. "Thank you," said LaFay. "Goodbye, then." "Goodbye, dear," said room service. LaFay put the phone down and sat on the bed. How had room service known which room she was in? She wondered. Were there cameras in the rooms to make sure that people didn't steal the soap or something? If there were cameras all over the hotel, then she'd have been seen slipping through the fire exit door, and they'd probably want to know why. No, LaFay told herself, she was just being silly. There must be some way that the telephone system and room service could tell which room you were dialing from. It must light up a number or something. That's what it must be. She was being stupid. Who would stay in a hotel with hidden cameras everywhere? All the guests would be embarrassed and go to bed with their clothes on. Back home, she and Jackie, Fergal, Albie, and Joshua often went to bed with their clothes on in the winter, but not because they didn't want people filming them in the nude. They did it because it was far too cold to take off their clothes at night. In fact, they'd often put on extra clothes, including the odd coat or two, before settling down to sleep. Another way of trying to keep warm was all to sleep in the same bed, which is what they did. Since their mother had died, their father slept in the back room, which was really a side room, remember? But he had the 1-bar electric heater on all night in the cold months, so he was fine. The rest of them bundled into what had once been his double bed and snuggled up together as the best they could. LaFay was the one who always felt the cold most, and, despite layers of shirts and coats, often kept Jackie awake with her teeth chattering. 5 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. "Room service," said a voice. LaFay jumped off the bed and opened the door. It wasn't room service at all. "Are you LaFay McNally?" asked a complete stranger, with a very unpleasant sneer indeed.